it's never straightforward or easy with retrofitting existing building. It's never built how you expected it to be built. It's always a bit of kind of archaeology.
I think the thing that's helped us, is that we're known for just kind of getting on with things, really. And, it sounds basic, but just getting on with things and making things work. The burden placed on us is increasing, even more so in the last year to 6 months with the Building Safety Act.
Hello and welcome to the Business of Architecture. I'm your host, Rion Willard, and today we will be joined by Colin, Davis and Suzanne Davenport for part 2 of their conversation where we're looking at sustainable design and energy efficient housing. This episode is sponsored by Smart Practice, Business of Architecture's flagship program to help you structure your firm for freedom, fulfillment, and financial profit. If you want access for our free training on how to do this, please visit smartpracticemethod.com. Or if you want to speak directly to one of our advisors about how we might be able to help you, please follow the link in the information. We are looking for architect developer stories for the Business of Architecture podcast. So, are you an architect developer with valuable insights to share? We're always on the lookout for passionate voices in the industry to join us on the Business of Architecture podcast. If you're ready to share your journey, lessons, strategies with our global audience, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us to explore being a guest on our show and help inspire other architect developers on their path. We'd be interested in hearing your story, whether you're at the very beginning of your development story or whether you have $100 million portfolio of projects already in the bag completed. We'd like to hear from you if you're working with the developers or that you've developed a number of small houses or you're working at a larger scale.
We're currently working for City of London, to retrofit buildings at the Golden Lane estate, where predominantly it was a project that started as a piece of work to assess how to sort of deal with 1950s windows, of various types that had really come to a point where they were in need of something significant doing to them, either replacing them entirely or refurbish them, or secondary glazing or whatever it was. And so we came to a project there where, on the face of it, there was a very small piece of work, big estate and challenging, but a small piece of work to look at the windows. And there was actually a long process of leading the client through the understanding that you can't just make a single change to a historic building by upgrading the windows, whether that's replacing them or refurbishing them, without having other impacts on the building. So needing to think about ventilation alongside improvements to the windows. And if you're upgrading the windows, well, shouldn't you also be thinking about roofs and walls and other areas of heat loss? So over a period of time, you move from a project that's trying to thinks it's setting out to tackle one thing, but actually through a process of sort of drawing and suggesting proposals and modeling them in energy terms, you can start to help a client understand why a project might need to be slightly different than they originally envisaged. And so that project has grown now. So it's not a complete, whole home retrofit, but it is tackling more and more of the building fabric and making sure that any changes that we do make to the building fabric aren't going to have unintended consequences on other elements, mold and condensation, for example. So that was that was quite an iterative process really with a client, where and actually, in fairness, involving residents as well. So actually when you're working on the Golden Lane estate, probably it feels like a quarter of the residents are other architects as well. So you can actually have some really interesting, so maybe some quite challenging meetings, but also a really fertile conversation, where lots of people are bringing lots of ideas to the table, so that's been fascinating, and sort of it is ongoing, probably be running for another few years whilst we deliver the works to the estate. But the retrofit is broad. Suzanne is also involved probably in two really extremes of retrofit, where delivering things to the past standard, past 2035, where there are really strict, in order to receive funding, there are really strict rules and processes to be adhered to. And then a project like our Energy Sprong project in Nottingham, which is a much more dramatic retrofit of homes, where really the entire home is reclad, which Suzanne is much better talking about.
Yeah, I'd say in both those cases, though, we're really fundamentally, it's like we're working for really like-minded clients. So clients, local authority clients, who really recognise the massive scale of the issue we have in this country with existing homes that aren't fit for purpose, kind of historic lack of repairs, of stock, residents who really need an awful lot of support just to get to a kind of base level of fundamentally being listened to and no longer having issues with their home that might not have been dealt with for years. So and yeah, we've working in for local authorities in Nottingham, in Lewisham, and in Wolverhampton. We've just found, really inspiring, and also working for larger contractors. So working for United Living, I think we found really, and especially in recent years, found really inspiring clients who are really trying to drive, within the limits of funding, which is, a huge challenge at both ends of those scales, whether you're trying to do the deep whole house Energy Sprong retrofit that happens while the residents stay in place. It's like using industrialized construction as well. So it's like putting a new home over the top of an existing home. And we have a real, amazing, I think, opportunity there to transform existing keep communities together and transform existing communities. And I think it's like once in a generation kind of golden opportunity to take these kind of essentially 60-year-old estates, dwellings, and make them fit for purpose, make them fit for this century, without wasting huge amounts of buildings and stock and carbon. So for me, retrofit is like incredibly exciting because it's a way to stick within our carbon budget and just strengthen amazing existing communities who are all, talk to those residents because they're the experts in what needs to happen in their local areas. And you can make quite small scale changes, not necessarily high cost ones, which can have a really high impact if you can, engage and really get to the bottom of understanding the problem. And then so our other scale of work we're working for, so the PAS 2035, under the PAS 2035 standard, and crucially to the SHDF funding. And so funding is really tight, there's a limited amount of money, but that's because of the scale of the problem. So I believe we really need to work within that. There's a very, very stringent link between EPC score and getting the money, essentially. So that does tie hands. But I think with those like-minded clients who really, do want to help, fundamentally want to help their residents, and we do, and our ability, so we're employed as retrofit designers, but we really come as architects, as that idea again about hopefully understanding the big picture, having a general approach. And so I think along with our clients, we're able to, as much as possible, bring expertise and hopefully address some other problems which aren't just tied to the funding. So for instance, making sure we do focus on thermal bridging as well, work out which are those like at-risk junctions where we might be making things like damp and mold worse, check those out, make sure we've got the best approach we can. It's never straightforward or easy with retrofitting existing building. It's never built how you expected it to be built. It's always a bit of kind of archaeology. However special the building might be, it doesn't matter whether it's listed or not, to be honest. They're all different and need quite a bit of care and attention to address those key items.
So is it in the world of retrofit, is it typically then local authorities who have already got existing housing stock that are looking to do it? Is it
really exclusively at the minute? The dream is to be able to do both. So to be able to do because we have this like a patchwork tenure in our country. It's the legacy of the right to buy policy from established in the 1980s, but very much still ongoing. I know there've been recent. The new government is making some attempts to change that, which is kind of interesting to see how that plays out. But I don't think we're ever going to now get away from the fact that probably what we see is the majority of suburban areas, about 50%, still either housing association or council stock, and private homes, and there'll be no, it's pepper potted. There's no, which in some ways is like a positive, because I think we have these fantastic mixed communities in our country, which might be a desire when we're doing new build housing that we can't necessarily always achieve. We kind of tend to end up with social housing in one particular place, where actually the reality of a lot of the communities where we work is we have this mixed tenure, which has its positives, but also if you can't retrofit the privately owned homes, we do have a problem. And I always say it's a bit like trying to keep warm by putting on a vest. We really want a coat that goes over the whole terrace. That's the sensible thing to do, but we're left with this kind of trying to do this piecemeal approach, and then we have to think really carefully about the junctions where you might have a cold neighbour, because you could actually even be making things worse. So it's a super challenge. Hopefully there'll be some kind of financial mechanisms which come forward in the future, because it's what we really need to do, is to do both tenures, and it would be brilliant for private owners as well. People should be able to opt in to these measures, far more efficient to tackle whole estates. Such, I think, a dream to be able to tackle not just the physical buildings, but what's around it as well. So to look at landscape, to look at traffic, to look at making streets, not roads. I think there's huge opportunity, and I'm really passionate about it. But at the minute, that's not quite joining up yet.
But yeah, our work is almost exclusively, housing associations and local authorities. That certainly in our experience, I imagine that's partly because they've got the bigger issues to try and tackle. The scale of stock that a housing association or a local authority is in possession of is huge. So they're more at the coalface of trying to tackle these things, and it's interesting when people come at it from different angles. One of the big challenges on all the projects has always been, where you've got a client that is genuinely aiming to reduce the cost of living for people in homes, and quite often that can be completely at odds with trying to improve the energy efficiency of a home. Because what we quite often find is you can easily spend a lot of money on improving the thermal efficiency of a home, but at the point that so for example, making 50-60% reductions in the amount of heat that it's taking to heat a home, but then you swap their fuel source from gas to electricity, and the chances are that people's bills are going to be at best at the same level that they've been on gas, or possibly higher. So there are huge challenges involved in it, and it's it's just not easy. And we certainly have had some successes, but part of the job is just to try and explain what you might actually be able to deliver from a project, and not misleading people that there is a sort of silver bullet that you can go in and you do this, you do that, and then at the end of it you're going to deliver everything: energy reductions, cost reductions, blah blah blah. It's all going to be super simple. It's just really not. It's a hard thing, and they tend to be quite long and kind of complex projects.
You have to be clear about what your drivers are, and so, like as Colin's saying, like fuel bills and decarbonising are different aims and have different. You need to do different things to achieve that.
And with your work with local authorities and housing associations, how do you win projects with those guys? Is it a case that you're typically on some kind of framework agreement that you have to kind of compete to get on, and then there's a pool of work which you and a group of other architects kind of compete for, or?
It's a bit of a mystery, if I'm completely honest. I'd love to say we had a silver bullet for that as well, but much of our work comes through word of mouth and connection. We a bunch of us, myself, Suzanne, Richard, do a lot of presenting at conferences, etc., on our work and on our research, which is a good link in to people. Yes, we are on frameworks, and we bust a gut all the time to get on them, and then find that they tend to be constantly shifting goalposts, and it's getting on frameworks is increasingly difficult for practices of our size, because you find absolutely arbitrary blockers. Your turnover, for example, the amount of frameworks now that want a turnover that is probably 2 or 3 times or more our turnover. And as far as we can see, turnover bears absolutely no relationship to your ability to be able to deliver a successful project, but that's what you're judged by. And so those things are becoming increasingly difficult for us to get onto. We have an odd history of losing projects, so competitions where we may become second or third, and the project starts with somebody else, and then a few months or years down the line, a client will come back and say, "Do you know what? It didn't work out. Could we have a chat about that project that we didn't give you?" That's happened, on numerous occasions, really. And so we rely a lot on sort of existing relationships and trying to keep those as people move from one client organization to a new client organization, I suppose. And I think the thing that's helped us, is that we're known for just kind of getting on with things, really. And it sounds basic, but just getting on with things and making things work. So, for example, the Energy Sprong project that we took on, nobody had delivered one of those in the UK before, I think. And
we first in the UK.
Yeah, and
we're taking it on in 2016, 2017.
And it was at a point where I suppose we were testing lots of skills that we either had or were generating. And actually, one of the interesting things that was happening around the time of the Energy Sprong project starting was the conversations around BIM and implementing BIM and sort of design for manufacture on projects. And there was lots of discussions about how to do it, what software you should use, what processes you should use, and it felt like those conversations were impacting on actually just getting on and doing it. So the interesting thing, on the Energy Sprong and a couple of other projects that were happening around that time, we were able to move away from just saying it's got to be Revit to going, well, look, we don't use Revit. We've 20 years experience of building buildings and designing them using VectorWorks, the software we know inside out. We can deliver 3D models in it. We can deliver the information you need. Let's park the conversation about how we're getting there. Let's look at the outputs that we're going to give you. And sure enough, we produced 3D information for that project, and the manufacturing business took it and they said, "You know what? This is so detailed that we actually have our own modeling package that we've designed ourselves to model these things. We can take your base information and use it to determine, to be the starting point for our manufacturing model." And it was really nice for it to be, let's get beyond a really simplistic conversation about it's got to be this, and let's just look at the outputs. Give us a chance to just get on and do our job. We you know, we'll promise we'll give you what you need, but just let's get on. Let's trial it. Let's give you some information and see if you can make it work, or together we can make it work. And I think that sort of ethos runs through a lot of our projects, really, where, you know, it's just about getting down and doing, you know, rather than getting sidetracked with conversations about really lengthy procedures or processes or how you're going to do something. Just make a start and get on and start designing, start drawing, start modeling.
Has there been? It's interesting that you're kind of saying this as well, about the challenges of procurement with these sorts of associations and the kinds of arbitrary things that they might be asking for, and you suspect that it's a list that somebody created at some point that now has become kind of enshrined. And nobody wants to deviate from it.
No, absolutely.
I think sometimes the procurement, you know, the whole procurement process can be almost like a thing in itself. And then if you actually, you know, the few projects that we have won through getting onto frameworks, you know, part of the work I've done with one of my roles at one point was to spend, you know, I think almost like 6 months just focusing on working on getting onto frameworks, trying to win work through that process. And then sometimes, like, the projects that we then win through that, which were fairly few and far between, but when we did win them, it wouldn't bear any resemblance, really, the actual project that you won to what was bid for, because all these ideals, say, had been put in, but it didn't necessarily reflect the budget that was for the project. Or, you know, you might have answered a whole question in really good faith on what you were going to do for social value in a particular area, but then that never really came through in the project because it was a kind of, sadly, been a box ticking exercise in a procurement framework. So I think that we still focus on some frameworks. Obviously we want to work with certain people, so we're always trying to find the right mechanism to do that, but mostly our work has really all been about like relationships, word of mouth, but then also that reputation. So like what Colin was talking about, becoming a bit known as being fixers. And then maybe the really key thing that's happened very much, and although that stream of retrofit work which really sprung from that first Energy Sprong project, and so that project is just incredibly collaborative, and that's continued. So the same kind of group of organisations, so us as an architect or retrofit designer, Melia's Homes as the solution provider, so essentially a contractor, but they set up their own factory to do industrialised retrofit. Energy Sprong as like a helping hand, guardian, but you know, that doesn't really describe their role. They're incredibly involved in like pre-retrofit monitoring, in helping to explain the concept to the local authority and the residents themselves, and then the clients themselves. So that kind of group of organisations, I think we'd like to have done more of it, and are limited by funding and probably this procurement and how to get in front of particular local authorities and work for them. But that group has really gone ahead, and that's probably how we've worked on a series of retrofit projects following that first project in Nottingham.
But I think the procurement in all its forms, whether it's procuring a design team, you know, or architectural services, you know, onto a framework, or whether it's procuring a building contractor to deliver a building, it is just not achieving what it needs to. You know, procurement seems to exist as an activity in and of itself, and so, you know, and I don't want to sound too much like I'm bad mouthing procurement departments. However, you know, I think the way they're often monitored is whether they delivered a successful procurement exercise, rather than what did the procurement exercise in and of itself then lead to. You know, so you might sit at the end of the procurement process and go, well, look, we achieved it. We got a dozen architects onto a framework, brilliant. But then what's the framework actually delivered? Or, you know, yes, we've run through a procurement exercise with a you know, local authority procurement department to appoint a contractor, and we got a contractor, but were they the right contractor for the project? You know, quite possibly not, because they're very different skills being successful in a procurement exercise to running a successful project. And I think and so I really feel I feel for sort of small contractors and smaller builders that don't have the skills to answer all of the questions really brilliantly in a procurement exercise, because when we're delivering a building, do I want to work with a team that can deliver a tender return, or do I want to work with a team that can think really carefully about delivering a complex building project? And so that that's I see that happening to us as well, where we are so margins are tight, right? Projects are difficult. We need to be spending our time and our energy on delivering projects, which means we can't support a procurement team or specialist. So it's frustrating, to try and be competing in a world where I think we're very good at what we do, but we're put up against organizations with much bigger resources, that can spend time and money on bidding for these things. But actually, that's probably unfair, to be honest. I think all architects are struggling with absolutely the same things, really. It's just how do we the burden placed on us is increasing, even more so in the last year to 6 months, with the Building Safety Act finally being put into place, and there being increased burden and emphasis put on our work, but we're expected still to be delivering those services for triflingly small amounts of money. So something has to change. I'm positive in that I think what we're being asked to do as architects, and possibly taking on this role of principal designer for building safety or for building regulations, is a good thing. It's really playing to the strengths of being an architect, and it's a thing I think architects will be very good at doing. But I'm worried about the financial implications of doing it. Which was really
and it's interesting as well. And I think I would love to see a kind of revolution or just a new way of procurement, and like the way you're saying that actually often the way that the procurement works is kind of just looking at, did we do a successful procurement? It's very isolated. It's not taking that generalized or generalist approach of what's the actual outcome. Has there ever been any opportunities for you, in the same way that you are writing and researching and informing kind of building technical standards? Has there ever been an opportunity, or could you see an opportunity in the future for you to be involved in informing housing authorities on their procurement process?
It would be great, and that did happen on one of our projects. So our project at Dermont, Thorpe, there was a really well-run procurement exercise with that project. Unfortunately, I'm not the best person to talk about it because I wasn't directly involved in it, but there was at least, I suppose, the time and understanding was put into the project that if you don't get the procurement right, it doesn't matter how good your design work is or how brilliant your placemaking is, if you don't deliver it in a way that achieves that goal, then you're setting yourself up to fail. So there was at least a project there where there was a recognition of that from the very, very early days. I mean, I have a sort of a strong feeling that tendering building projects just doesn't work. The most successful projects that I have worked on in terms of delivering quality buildings, where everybody was paid appropriately for what they did, clients were pleased with the outcome, designers were pleased with the outcome, contractors were pleased with the outcome were all some form of negotiated contract. So we maybe established who we thought might be good at delivering the project.
Mm-hmm.
And then the team went to speak to them.
You worked with them all the way through.
And we negotiated with them all the way through.
Yeah.
So that there's a really clear understanding of what skills you need to deliver the project.
How much it's actually going to cost.
How much it's going to cost, whether it's buildable, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And, it relies on trust and it relies on a lot of trust, but you can put checks and balances in to make sure that things are being done fairly, fairly in sort of cost terms. But I think that the interesting thing is, it's very expensive for everybody to tender for projects. It's very expensive for contractors, architects, other designers to tender for projects. So, if you can formulate a mechanism to get to the end result where the client is comfortable because their main aim, whilst cost is important, quality is also important. Not equal. Cost is always the most important thing, really, because nobody's got a limitless budget. But they want to work with somebody in a really constructive way to get to a point where costs are certain as they can be. And everybody feels like they're not being taken for a ride or fleeced through a process. I just think you can set a project up in a way that it's more likely to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas my feeling of procurement exercises is quite often they set up a project that from day one there's a conflict.
So then the Nottingham Retrofit project had a really interesting approach to procurement. So was it something called a competitive dialogue tender process, and it was so they set up so they procured the performance. So the Energy Sprong approach is this outcome-led approach. So you procure a performance target, and then the only way to achieve that is to install monitoring in every home when they're complete. And if there's a default against that, the contractor's liable. And then the other thing that was really unusual in the process as well is that the residents were involved so right from the beginning, the residents of the pilot projects, the first 10 homes that were retrofitted, they were involved in the procurement decision. So they helped to pick. So our team, so we were in the tender process, we were engaging with the residents to work out what they'd like to see in their homes. And I think that was one of the key reasons that our team was picked. And then that kind of thread of engagement ran through the whole project, because a retrofit contractor, it's a totally different role or way of working than a traditional speculative house building contractor would be. So you imagine you've got to work every day, the residents are living in their homes, you've got to work around them, you've got to get it all, everything's got to stay up and running throughout the whole time. Sequencing is really key. You've got to communicate all the time, and I think, as a result of that, the kind of retrofit specialists, there's almost like whole new roles of being resident liaison officers that are all developing in the industry. And I think for me, again, like one of the best examples is where we're working with small SMEs, where it's the same individuals who are designing the retrofit who are then also doing that resident liaison on a day-to-day basis. You can see some like really positive examples there of really close collaboration and small companies being able to provide a kind of higher service because it can be fully involved individuals.
And just before we conclude, I thought it was very interesting as well what you were saying about the procurement process and the kind of some arbitrary requirements that they have. And one of them was for you to be Revit based. And actually, you stuck to your guns and use. You were saying you've been using VectorWorks for a long period of time. Perhaps you could talk a little bit more about your usage of that particular software of using VectorWorks, and also in the context of like how did you convince the that you didn't need to change?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's come up a number of times as well, where there's like from other consultants to change software so it's more.
Absolutely. I think so we like lots of architects, I think we started using VectorWorks at a point where producing drawings was really a sort of trying to replicate as closely as you could what you used to do on a drawing board, and so VectorWorks felt like the software that could deliver that. 25 years ago, you could make a beautiful two-dimensional, really nicely cross-hatched, drawing that mimicked, what you would produce on a drawing board, and we all liked it for that. It was very different to, other softwares, and we carried on with that sort of process of designing for quite a long time. And in fact, there's still an element of that we really love about the software. You can do a very quick set of presentation documents from it, for example. But over time, we resisted the sort of shift to sort of BIM, whatever that is, because we felt like we were delivering good buildings. Let's be outcome based. What are we doing? We're delivering great buildings. Does it really matter how we're doing that? We felt confident we could get there in a two-dimensional environment, but there was an obvious need to change. And so, over a period of years, we sort of tried to shift our processes, and I think we felt like we would be better off trying to take a piece of technology that we felt we knew inside out and try and get the results from it than throwing away everything that we knew and starting from scratch. And I think that was borne out really, because what became quite clear is that is the software that you're using is important, but getting your modeling conceptually right is even more important. So what are you actually going to model and what are you not going to model? And so that became evident to us that we could give people information in a format that they need from VectorWorks. We could deliver that in IFC. We could deliver it in 3D DWG. You can actually deliver Revit files directly from VectorWorks now. So once we convinced people that we could give them information in the format that they needed, the most important thing was then to make sure that your model is actually giving people information that they need, rather than just vast amount of data that you can put into a model because you can, And so I think on the successful projects, it's where we've managed to convey that actually you're just saying, look, forget about how we're doing it. It's what we're giving you that's important. And it's it goes back to this idea that we as architects should understand fundamentally which bit of information you need to give to which person, rather than just going, here's a model, and giving a model to with all of the information that a structural engineer might need to the person who's doing the irrigation system for the landscape, and so, what became fundamental was not the software, but in that shift from doing things in a traditional way to a BIM modeled environment was actually just understanding what needs to go into the model, so that you get the input right, then you've got a better chance of getting the right output. And so we put our time and our efforts into understanding that, rather than in tackling a new piece of software. And actually it's been great, and there are, there's been some really great things that have come out recently. So, VectorWorks implemented a embodied carbon calculator built in to their software. So very simply enables you to assign materials to objects, components, etc. And within those materials is a embodied carbon measure. So a measure of kilograms of embodied carbon per either meter cubed or kilogram or whatever. And you can embed that in your model. And obviously the thing that the model is great for us is extracting quantities, so you can very quickly extract those quantities and apply through the calculator, apply the materials and that level of information to it, and very quickly get an idea about the impacts that you're making through your design choices, and that's just, it's just been a really simple integration in the software that, by understanding how to model things properly and with a little bit of information, knowledge about how to read an EPD, you can suddenly get some really high level, quick results to inform some of your design choices. So I feel like it's a conversation we have less and less, really, about what software you're using to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Just demonstrate to somebody that you can do it. Give them the file. Give them the model. Share it with them. Let them interrogate it. And sometimes, do you know what? If you're working with the wrong people, you're never going to change their view, because if they've got to do more than just click one button, they'll and do something that they've already done, they're maybe going to be unhappy. But I'd like to think that the quality of information that we're giving to people means that it doesn't matter whether it's come from Revit or it's come from anything else. It's
Perfect.
about the data, really.
Great. I think that's a perfect place for us to conclude the conversation there. That's been absolutely wonderful. I could have asked you loads more questions. I wanted to carry on talking for another 45 minutes or so, but thank you so much for your time and expertise today, and for lifting, showing us behind the scenes of Studio Partington and giving us really interesting insights into retrofit, procurement, housing. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Enoch Sears here, and I have a request. Since you are a listener here of the Business of Architecture podcast, Rion and I, we love putting this podcast together. We love sharing information as much as we can glean from all the other industries that we're a part of to bring it back to empower you as an architect and a designer. And one thing that helps us in our mission is the growth of this podcast, simply because it helps other architects stand for more of their value, spreads the business information that we're sharing to empower architects together, so architects, designers, engineers can really step into their greatness, whatever that looks like for each individual. And so here my simple ask is for you to join us and be part of our community by doing the following: heading over to iTunes and leaving a review of the podcast. And as an expression of our sincere thanks, we would like to give you a free CEU course that can get you one professional development unit, but more importantly, will give you a very solid and firm foundation on your journey to becoming a profitable and thriving architect. So here's the process for that. After you leave us a review, send an email to support@businessofarchitecture.com. Let us know the username that you use to leave the review, and we will send you that free training. On the training, you'll discover what 99% of architecture firm owners wish they would have known 20 years ago.
Hello, listeners. We hope you're enjoying our show. We love bringing you these insightful conversations, but we couldn't do it without the support of our amazing sponsors. If you're a business owner or know someone who would be an excellent fit for our audience, we'd love to hear from you. Partnering with us means your brand will reach over 40,000 engaged listeners each month. Interested in becoming a sponsor? Please send us an email at support@businessofarchitecture.com. The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to help you be unstoppable.